The Jefferson Civic Center had seen its share of historic moments, but tonight the marble hallways echoed with a different kind of tension, one thick with anticipation, caution, and something deeper, a yearning for clarity. Under towering American flags and grand chandeliers, thousands of citizens filled the rows, veterans wearing their service pins, retired factory workers in pressed jackets, small business owners, nurses, farmers, the backbone of the country, gathered not for spectacle, but for answers. This was the Liberty Civic Forum, a sacred tradition where voices met on the battleground of ideas, and tonight's clash promised to be one for the ages. At center stage, seated under a blue and silver banner proclaiming government, technology, and the future of democracy, were two figures whose names alone had stirred nationwide debate. Elon Musk, the billionaire inventor and defender of free speech, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the fiery critic who vowed to expose what she called the billionaire's quiet takeover of America. Between them stood moderator William Prescott, a former Chief Justice turned civic guardian whose stern gaze and unshakable reputation promised order if it could be kept. Prescott's voice carried the solemn weight of the moment as he welcomed the nation. "Tonight," he said, "we confront questions larger than policy. Who holds the power to shape the future of this republic, and who truly serves the people?" The hall fell silent, no movement, no coughs, no fidgeting. Even the cameramen held their breath, sensing the gravity of what was about to unfold. On one side, Musk sat still, hands folded neatly before him, his expression unreadable, exuding a quiet confidence, the calm of a man who had faced rockets exploding, markets collapsing, and yet remained. On the other, Crockett leaned slightly forward, her eyes sharp, her notes clutched tightly in her hand, as if ready to strike. Across television screens and smartphones nationwide, millions tuned in. Farmers in Kansas, steelworkers in Ohio, veterans in Florida, small-town pastors in Texas, all ready to see not just who could speak, but who could stand. This wasn't just another debate. It was a test of character. And America, battered by years of shouting and division, longed desperately to believe that calm strength, truth, and reason still had a place in public life. The clock struck 7. The first question was about to be asked. The battle for the future was about to begin. Moderator William Prescott adjusted his glasses, letting the silence linger for a moment longer, a deliberate pause to underline the importance of what was about to unfold. Then, with a voice steady as bedrock, he spoke. "Mr. Musk, Representative Crockett, tonight we begin with a question at the very heart of governance. Project Vanguard, a sweeping government efficiency initiative you, Mr. Musk, have advised. Is it a path to renewal, or a reckless dismantling of the public trust?" The spotlight fell first on Elon Musk. Calmly, almost methodically, he leaned toward the microphone. "Project Vanguard," Musk began, his voice low but unmistakably clear, "is about giving America back to its people. Every year, hundreds of billions vanish into bureaucratic black holes, unaccountable, wasteful, decaying the very structures meant to serve us. Vanguard has already saved the American taxpayer over $80 billion, 0 cents, by streamlining redundancies, modernizing outdated programs, and returning efficiency to the heart of governance." The crowd stirred. A few nods from the veterans seated up front. Musk continued without raising his voice, letting the weight of his words do the work. "This isn't about power, it's about responsibility." But before the applause could fully form, Representative Jasmine Crockett shot forward, her voice cutting through the hall. "Responsibility?" she echoed, almost laughing. "Let's call it what it is, a billionaire's backroom operation to gut public service. Project Vanguard isn't reform, it's betrayal. It's slashing jobs for single mothers, veterans, seniors, tossing hard-working Americans aside like yesterday's news, while billionaires like you consolidate even more influence." A sharp murmur rippled through the hall. The tension snapped tighter, like a wire drawn to the breaking point. Musk didn't flinch. "Facts, Representative," he said quietly, his tone razor-sharp without rising. 12% reduction in redundant federal positions, $68 billion redirected to paying down the national debt, every decision made public in real time on X, for anyone, including you, to scrutinize? Crockett leaned in, jabbing her finger toward him. Redundant? She challenged. You call a public school administrator redundant? You call a healthcare worker in rural America redundant? What you call efficiency, Mr. Musk, real families call catastrophe. You don't live in their world, you float above it, on private jets and SpaceX rockets. The words hung in the air, bitter and scalding. Some in the audience applauded. Others frowned, uncomfortable with the rawness of the attack. Musk's expression remained unchanged, though his voice now carried a sharper edge, still calm, but unmistakably cutting. Representative emotion cannot erase reality. America is $25 trillion in debt. If saving this nation's future means upsetting a few Washington insiders who have forgotten how to serve the people, then so be it. A low rumble of approval moved through parts of the hall, a deep, resonant sound from men and women who had seen factories shudder, pensions slashed, promises broken by decades of political mismanagement. Crockett, sensing her footing slipping, leaned harder into indignation. Easy for you to say, Mr. Musk, when you don't have to worry about feeding your family next week. Project Vanguard isn't about the people's future. It's about protecting your profits and your power. Musk tilted his head slightly, almost in amusement. My profits come from creating things that serve Americans. Cars, rockets, energy solutions, and a platform where people, including my harshest critics, can speak freely. Can Congress say the same? His eyes widened. A ripple of laughter, faint but undeniable, passed through the crowd. Prescott, ever the guardian of order, raised a hand to settle the room. Let us not forget, he said firmly, that tonight is about ideas, not accusations. Representative Crockett, you'll have your full opportunity to present solutions shortly. Mr. Musk, thank you for your response. The first exchange was over, but the gloves had clearly come off. No one in the Civic Center doubted it now. This was no staged debate. This was a collision of two Americas, one clinging to the old ways, the other promising a disruptive, if uncomfortable, new future. And the battle had only just begun. The first skirmish had barely cooled when moderator William Prescott, with the precision of a surgeon, shifted the ground beneath them. His voice, calm but edged with steel, cut through the heavy air. Before we move on, a deeper question demands an answer. Reform is one thing, but patriotism, loyalty to the American people, is another. Mr. Musk, Representative Crockett, in your pursuit of influence and reform, who stands for America's future, and who sells it to the highest bidder? The hall seemed to contract inward, drawing a collective breath. Elon Musk, unshaken, leaned slightly forward, clasping his hands together on the table. His voice, low and deliberate, carried the weight of a man used to building not just companies, but futures. I don't serve politicians, foreign interests, or Wall Street, Musk began. I serve one customer, the American people. And that service means telling hard truths, even when they're uncomfortable. We cannot lead the world if we are drowning in waste, inefficiency, and bureaucratic decay. Vanguard isn't an attack on America. It's a rescue mission, a fight to ensure our children inherit strength, not debt. The words struck a chord. In the second row, a Vietnam veteran, his service cap perched proudly atop thinning gray hair, nodded solemnly. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was not about to yield the field. She rose slightly from her seat, her hand gripping the lectern like a lightning rod. Her voice, sharp and rising, cracked across the chamber. Spare us the speeches, Mr. Musk. You talk about saving America, but your factories hum overseas. Your wealth is tied to foreign markets. You build rockets to Mars while American families struggle to keep the lights on. Your so-called service is self-service. The crowd tensed, a murmur racing through the rows like the early rumbles of a coming storm. Trump's expression barely shifted. He met Crockett's fire with a coolness that was almost unnerving. Respectfully, Representative, facts matter. Tesla has created over 120,000 American jobs in the last 5 years. We've invested $22 billion, 0 cents, directly into U.S. manufacturing and clean energy. We pay our taxes here. Unlike many corporations supported by your own colleagues, he paused, letting the words sink in. And yes, we sell in China, because if America doesn't compete globally, we lose. We don't strengthen this nation by retreating. We lead by building stronger, smarter, and faster than anyone else. Thunderous applause burst from one side of the hall, raw, sincere, and forceful. It was the sound of a generation that had seen their hometowns hollowed out by bad trade deals and political indifference. Crockett seized on the opportunity to escalate. Competing globally, she snapped, while your administration slaps tariffs on China, you rake in profits from your Shanghai plant? That's not patriotism, Mr. Musk. That's playing both sides. The accusation rang through the Civic Center, daring Musk to falter. But Musk smiled slightly, almost sadly, as if he had seen this tactic coming from miles away. You're right to raise concerns about foreign influence, Representative, but here's the difference. I built the Shanghai factory without Chinese government subsidies. Every car exported from it returns profits to America. Every innovation strengthens American industry. And unlike many politicians, he said, the steel now unmistakable in his voice, I haven't taken one dime in foreign donations. Check the public records. Prescott watched silently, allowing the exchange to stretch, letting the audience feel the weight of each claim, each counterstrike. Crockett, undeterred, pressed on. Even if that's true, the message it sends. Working with rivals like China erodes American leadership. You sit at the White House advising policies while profiting abroad. That's a conflict of interest, Mr. Musk. No billionaire can serve two masters, profit and patriotism. The line hung there, a stiletto aimed at Musk's credibility. But Musk leaned back slightly, folding his hands. His response came not with fire, but with finality. Representative, if patriotism means building American jobs, defending free speech, paying billions in U.S. taxes, and keeping innovation on American soil, then I'm guilty as charged. He paused, his voice deepening. True patriotism isn't about hiding behind slogans or picking political fights. It's about action, measurable, undeniable action. America leads when Americans lead, not when politicians grandstand and stall. A thunderclap of applause broke over the stage, louder this time, not just polite, but visceral. Veterans rose to their feet. Small business owners clapped until their palms reddened. In living rooms across the country, television screens glowed as viewers nodded in agreement. Moderator Prescott, sensing the seismic shift, finally interjected. Thank you, Mr. Musk. Representative Crockett, you will have another opportunity to address the specifics shortly. For now, let's turn to another pillar of our democracy, free speech, and the power of platforms like X to shape it. The battle over loyalty to America had been fought, and in the eyes of many in that hall and millions more watching from home, the scoreboard had already tilted sharply in Musk's favor. The applause from Musk's defense of patriotism had barely faded when moderator William Prescott shifted the weight of the conversation once more. His voice, measured and grave, cut through the thickening air. Freedom of speech, the cornerstone of our republic, now collides with questions of corporate power. Mr. Musk, Representative Crockett, does the platform X safeguard or endanger that freedom? A collective hush fell over the Civic Center. This was the question many had been waiting for. Prescott turned first to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her eyes flashing with renewed fire. Thank you, Mr. Prescott, she began, her voice sharpened to a blade's edge. Let's be clear. Under Mr. Musk's leadership, X hasn't become a beacon of free speech. It's become a bullhorn for extremism. Algorithms quietly amplify certain voices while burying others. Users critical of Mr. Musk or his political allies find themselves shadow banned, silenced without warning. That's not free speech. That's curated control. A few cheers erupted from pockets of the audience. Younger activists, progressive organizers, their voices defiant, but there was an underlying unease, too, a sense that accusations alone wouldn't be enough. Elon Musk, seemingly unfazed, adjusted the microphone slightly and spoke with the calmness of a man discussing weather patterns rather than the future of free expression. Representative. Accusations are easy. Proof is harder. Since acquiring X, we have open-sourced our algorithm. Anyone from coders in Kansas to journalists in New York can review how posts are ranked. We've banned no political speech. In fact, under my leadership, the number of active users has grown to 650 million per month. And for the first time in years, both left-wing and right-wing activists trend freely without corporate gatekeepers deciding what Americans are allowed to see. He paused, letting the room absorb it. If free speech frightens you, Musk said, his tone as sharp as flint, perhaps the real fear isn't about fairness, but about losing control over the narrative. A rumble of applause, low and resonant, filled the chamber. Crockett leaned forward, her hands tightening into fists atop the lectern. "You talk about transparency, but it's smoke and mirrors," she barked. "You may not delete posts outright, but you manipulate visibility, pushing pro-Trump, pro-Musk content to the forefront while silencing voices of reason. It's digital gerrymandering, Mr. Musk. It's deceit, dressed up as democracy." Musk allowed himself a small, almost pitying smile. He reached for his phone, holding it casually for all to see. "Let's settle this," he said simply, fingers moving quickly over the screen. Within seconds, the giant monitors at the back of the Civic Center lit up. A live poll Musk had just posted on X. Does X today promote freer speech than before? The results began to pour in instantly. Votes by the tens of thousands, a rolling tide visible for all to witness. Within a minute, the numbers spoke. 74% voted yes. Musk set his phone down slowly. His voice, when he spoke again, was almost too soft, forcing the audience to lean in. "I don't ask for trust. I ask for verification. Every American deserves a platform where no elite decides what opinions are allowed. X doesn't curate freedom, it unleashes it. If you disagree, post your criticisms of me. They'll go viral just like everything else. Free speech," he said, "is not a favor I grant. It's a right every citizen already owns." The veterans in the front rows, men and women who had once defended that very principle on distant battlefields, rose to their feet in applause. Others followed, a slow, swelling wave of approval. But Crockett, sensing her narrative slipping, countered quickly, her voice rising with urgency. "Don't be fooled," she cried. "A billionaire owning the town square isn't freedom, it's feudalism. You control the code, you control the conversation. Your so-called open source is meaningless when you still own the levers behind the scenes. Real freedom would mean true public accountability, not a tech emperor smiling down from his throne." The hall crackled with divided energy, some jeering, others clapping, still others sitting rigidly, unsure. Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he stood, a rare move, and faced the audience directly. Every major government agency, every activist group, every journalist critical of me, they're still on X, still speaking, still organizing. If I wanted to silence dissent, you'd know it. Instead, critics of me dominate every trending topic every week. That's not feudalism, that's freedom. Messy, uncomfortable, but undeniable. He let the words hang there. No teleprompter, no handlers whispering in his ear. Just a man facing a nation, standing on the battlefield of ideas. Moderator Prescott finally rose from his chair, his face unreadable. "Thank you both. The question of free speech remains vital to our republic, and tonight the American people have seen firsthand how fiercely it is still contested." Crockett clenched her jaw, her eyes darting toward the glowing screen still showing the poll results. Musk calmly retook his seat, his posture relaxed, almost serene, while Crockett visibly bristled with frustration, trapped between her anger and the reality unfolding around her. And somewhere in the back of the Civic Center, amid the flags and the marble, an old veteran whispered to his wife, loud enough for those around him to hear. "Finally, a man who doesn't just talk freedom, but fights for it." The battle lines had been drawn deeper. and the war for America's voice was only heating up. The weight of the previous exchanges had begun to show. Jasmine Crockett's breathing grew heavier, her hand fidgeting with the stack of papers on her lectern. Meanwhile, Elon Musk sat composed, almost motionless, as if the growing storm before him was simply weathering itself out. The Civic Center buzzed with a low, unspoken energy, the kind that fills the air before a thunderclap. Moderator William Prescott, sensing the tension cresting, opened the floor once again. "Representative Crockett," he said, his voice slow and neutral, "you've raised concerns about influence and control. Please elaborate on your vision for protecting the American people from undue corporate power." It was meant as a lifeline, a chance for Crockett to reset, to rally, but under the searing lights and the crushing expectations of millions watching, Crockett seized it not with clarity, but with fury. She slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the grand hall like a gunshot. "Vision?" she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of rising anger. "My vision is simple. America should not be ruled by billionaires playing God. Mr. Musk stands here talking about freedom while he lines his pockets, manipulates narratives, and advises a president who divides this country every single day." The words burst out of her in a torrent, hot, uncontrolled, visceral. Some audience members gasped, others shook their heads. A few younger progressives clapped, but the applause was thin, scattered, a reflection of the growing discomfort rippling through the room. Musk said nothing. He simply tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing, studying Crockett the way a master chess player watches a novice realize too late they've blundered into a trap. Crockett pressed on, her voice growing shriller. "You preach about saving America, but every move you make consolidates more power into your hands. You've turned X into your propaganda machine, you gut the federal workforce, and you dare to stand here and claim you're the hero?" Her words cracked the air like a whip, but something crucial was missing. Coherence, passion had overtaken precision. Anger had crowded out argument. Musk finally leaned forward, his voice measured and disturbingly calm. "Representative," he said, almost gently, "I understand your frustration. Change is hard. Losing control is harder. But shouting doesn't change facts. Emotion doesn't erase numbers." He placed his hands deliberately on the table. "You accuse, I show data, you shout, I build. Which of us," he asked quietly, "is truly serving the American people tonight?" The Civic Center was silent except for the sound of Crockett's heavy breathing. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to zoom in on the furious Congresswoman or the billionaire who had just dismantled her without ever raising his voice. Crockett, now visibly trembling, tried to retake the floor. "You don't get to paint yourself as a patriot while you profit from authoritarian regimes," she shouted, her voice cracking into a higher register. "You don't get to own our public square, shape elections, and call that freedom." She pointed an accusing finger at Musk, her hand shaking. "You're not a savior, you're a tyrant with a smartphone." The accusation hung in the air, bold and raw. But the faces in the crowd told a different story. There was sympathy, not for Crockett's rage, but for her collapse. What had begun as righteous indignation now looked dangerously close to an emotional unraveling before the eyes of the nation. Musk sat still for a long moment, allowing the silence to deepen. Then he spoke, low and steady. "The difference between us, Representative, is simple. I don't fear free speech, even when it targets me. You seem to fear it when it refuses to bend to your narrative. Americans aren't looking for rulers," he said, scanning the audience with a piercing gaze. "They're looking for stewards, for people who trust them enough to tell the truth even when it hurts." It was not loud, it was not showy, it was devastating. Somewhere high in the balcony, a solitary hand clapped once, then twice. Others followed, until the hall vibrated again with slow, heavy applause, the kind not given for theatrics, but for courage. Jasmine Crockett staggered back half a step, the color draining from her face. She fumbled with her notes, desperately trying to summon another attack, another salvo that could stem the rising tide against her. But it was too late. In homes across America, viewers who had tuned in expecting a clash of titans saw something else unfold. A battle between composure and chaos, reason and rage. And the choice between the two was becoming increasingly obvious. Moderator Prescott, after letting the moment settle heavily over the chamber, finally spoke. "Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Musk. The American people will judge the strength of ideas, not the volume of voices." But even he knew. Tonight, the judgment had already begun, and for Jasmine Crockett, the slope was growing steeper with every passing second. The air inside the Jefferson Civic Center had become unbearably tight, every eye trained on the stage where two futures, two visions of America, had collided. Elon Musk remained seated, calm, the picture of implacable certainty. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett trembled, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides, the last of her composure slipping visibly away. Moderator William Prescott, maintaining the decorum that had defined the forum for decades, offered a final, neutral prompt. "Representative Crockett, you may respond briefly before we move forward." It was meant as an olive branch, a chance for recovery, for dignity, but it was already too late. Crockett's face twisted with anger, her voice breaking before the first words left her mouth. "I'm not sitting here," she said, her tone raw, "to be mocked by a billionaire who thinks money gives him the right to dictate our democracy." She reached for her microphone, yanking it from her jacket with a screech of metal. The mic slammed against the polished table with a sharp, jarring clang that echoed off the marble walls. The audience gasped, a sharp collective intake of breath as Crockett ripped the lapel pin of the forum from her jacket, flinging it onto the table beside the microphone. Without another word, she turned sharply, her heels striking hard against the floor, storming off stage with furious staccato steps. For a moment, the hall was frozen in stunned silence. Elon Musk didn't move. He simply watched her go, his expression a portrait of unsettling calm, as if he had just watched a storm pass that had never truly threatened him. His hands remained neatly folded on the table. His gaze never faltered. The cameras, unsure where to focus, jerked between Crockett's retreating figure and Musk's unwavering presence. In the upper galleries, some spectators stood, confused. Others shook their heads slowly, the weight of what had just happened beginning to settle. Then a sound emerged, scattered applause, at first tentative, then growing stronger, not for the spectacle of Crockett's anger, but for the restraint, the patience, the unshakable demeanor Musk had maintained, even in the face of a public breakdown. Moderator Prescott cleared his throat, visibly shaken, but professional as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice grave, "this forum was founded on the principle that debate, even fierce debate, must be met with resilience, not rage. We regret Representative Crockett's departure, but the discussion will continue. We owe it to the Republic to do so." Musk gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an unspoken agreement that the conversation was bigger than any one person's pride. Behind the stage, the echoes of Crockett's stormy exit faded into the cavernous backstage corridors. But on the main floor, something irreversible had happened. The audience and the millions watching at home had witnessed a moment of pure contrast, dignity against defiance, calm against collapse. On social media, clips of the walkout spread like wildfire within minutes. The moment was spliced, replayed, captioned, 1,000 versions, all carrying the same unmistakable message. Musk stayed. Crockett ran. And in that one instant, before another word was spoken, the momentum of the night and perhaps of the broader national conversation had shifted irreversibly. The Civic Center, once a hall of debate, had become a symbol. And the symbol was clear. In a divided, exhausted America, composure was strength. And strength, quiet, enduring, unshakable, still commanded respect. The echoes of Jasmine Crockett's footsteps had barely faded into the wings of the Jefferson Civic Center when the real explosion began. not within the grand marble halls, but across the unseen arteries of American life, the internet. Within minutes, clips of Crockett's furious walkout flooded YouTube and every news network in the country. A single short video, Musk seated calmly, Crockett ripping off her microphone, the stunned silence of the audience, racked up over 5 million views in the first hour alone. Headlines screamed across digital front pages. Crockett walks out. Musk stays standing. Composure versus chaos. Musk dominates Civic Forum showdown. Billionaire crushes Congresswoman on live TV. Conservative news outlets seized the moment like a gift from heaven. Fox News ran rolling coverage titled, "The Calm Before the Collapse, Musk's Masterclass in Leadership." Talk radio erupted. Callers flooded in, praising Musk's discipline and lamenting the collapse of civil discourse among modern politicians. Sean Hannity opened his evening show with a booming declaration. Tonight, America saw the real difference between building something and just shouting about it. On the other side of the aisle, progressive media scrambled to frame the walkout as a protest against oligarchic power, but the footage spoke louder than the spin clips of Crockett's trembling hands, her raised voice cracking into incoherence, played again and again, drowning out attempts to reframe her departure as principled. Memes spread like wildfire. One popular image showed Musk calmly sipping water at the table with the caption, "When you bring a tantrum to a data fight." Others stitched together Crockett's exit with a rocket launch, overlaying the words, "faster than space." Public sentiment was unmistakable. Polls sprang up on X asking viewers who they believed won the debate. In one poll, with over 400,000 votes, Musk led with 82% approval. Even those not politically aligned with him, independents, libertarians, disillusioned moderates, applauded the way he had handled the moment, with composure, facts, and unshakable presence. Meanwhile, on the ground at the Civic Center, reporters mobbed the exits, trying to catch any comment from Crockett's staff, but none came. Her team had vanished as quickly as she had. Inside, Musk remained seated for another 15 minutes, answering follow-up questions from the moderators with the same steady cadence, even as the online world erupted around him. By the time Musk finally stood to leave, escorted by a simple security team and a few advisors, the narrative was already sealed. He hadn't just survived the night, he had turned it into a demonstration, a proof point, that in a noisy, angry age, true leadership didn't require shouting. It only required standing your ground while the storm burned itself out. And for millions watching at home, that lesson had never felt more necessary or more inspiring. In the days that followed the explosive events at the Liberty Civic Forum, the political aftershock spread far beyond the marble halls of the Jefferson Civic Center. What had initially seemed like just another high-profile debate had now become a national reckoning, a turning point not only for the careers of Elon Musk and Jasmine Crockett, but for the entire American conversation about leadership, truth, and strength. Jasmine Crockett, once seen as a rising progressive firebrand, found herself trapped in a downward spiral. Clips of her walkout saturated every corner of the internet, and no amount of televised interviews or social media statements could reclaim the narrative. When she tried to frame her exit as a protest against billionaire oppression, the public response was merciless. Polls showed her approval ratings, among independents and moderates, crucial for national influence, plummeted by over 18% in a matter of days. Even some Democratic colleagues behind closed doors whispered about the Crockett collapse, fearing association with her would be a political liability heading into election cycles. Her attempts at damage control, including appearances on sympathetic media outlets, were undercut by the relentless replaying of the walkout footage, a permanent digital scar she could not erase. To many Americans, especially older voters who valued stoicism, dignity, and composure, Crockett hadn't merely lost an argument, she had abandoned the field under pressure. And for a generation that had lived through real struggles, wars, recessions, social upheaval, walking away was the one thing that could not be easily forgiven. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's stature only grew. His followers on X surged by millions in the aftermath. More critically, his approval rating among independent voters, particularly Americans aged 50 and older, climbed dramatically. Poll after poll reflected the same pattern. Americans were weary of grandstanding, shouting, and emotional theatrics. They craved resilience, calm leadership, and the simple power of a steady voice under fire. Musk was hailed across conservative and centrist circles as a new kind of figure, a private citizen who, without shouting, without pandering, could dismantle political narratives armed only with data, clarity, and unshakable nerve. Commentators noted a deeper shift unfolding. It wasn't just about Musk versus Crockett. It was about the American people beginning to reward composure over chaos again, substance over performance. Major newspapers published lengthy think pieces, The Return of Quiet Strength in American Leadership, Why Musk's Forum Victory Resonated with Older Voters, The Collapse of Performative Politics in Real Time. At civic groups and veterans halls across the nation, the discussion echoed. "We're tired of screaming," one retired Marine was quoted saying. "It's time we started listening to the ones who stand their ground without losing their heads." The Liberty Civic Forum, long a respected but underwatched event, suddenly found itself at the center of renewed national interest. Sponsors flooded back, ratings surged. Americans, it seemed, were hungry again. Not for more noise, but for leadership that could endure it. In the end, the fallout from that night wasn't just political. It was cultural. It marked a quiet but unmistakable shift. The reminder that even in a loud, divided nation, there is still immense power, perhaps the greatest power, in standing firm, speaking plainly, and letting facts outlast fury. As the dust settled from the clash at the Liberty Civic Forum, a deeper truth began to crystallize. Not just about two individuals on a stage, but about the spirit of a nation at a crossroads. In an age saturated with noise, outrage, and endless performance, Americans had been reminded of something simpler, something older. Real leadership is not measured by the loudest voice in the room, but by the one who refuses to bend when the storm arrives. Elon Musk's calm endurance in the face of relentless attacks wasn't just a personal victory, it was a cultural moment, a demonstration that strength and dignity, once dismissed as relics of a bygone era, still commanded respect. For Americans aged 50 and older, men and women who had weathered real crises, built real communities, and sacrificed real things, the message resonated like a long-forgotten anthem. Composure is not weakness. Truth is not violence. Quiet resilience is still a force more powerful than fury. Jasmine Crockett's walkout, painful as it was to watch, served as a counterpoint, a warning of what happens when emotion overtakes reason, when indignation replaces preparation. In her collapse, many saw not just an individual faltering, but a broader failure of a political culture obsessed with spectacle over substance. And so, the lessons from that night endure. Americans, especially those who have lived enough life to know that tempers fade but consequences remain, were reminded that the future belongs not to the angriest, but to the steadiest. That arguments are not won by the volume of a voice, but by the endurance of the truth behind it. In the end, the Liberty Civic Forum offered more than a debate. It offered a vision, one where America could still be a place where calm courage beats chaos, where leadership is judged not by theatrics, but by character. And for a nation exhausted by years of shouting across aisles and screens, that vision felt less like nostalgia and more like hope. Because in the end, true leadership doesn't need to dominate the noise, it only needs to stand and let the truth do the talking.